From one wartime leader to another, let's talk about Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. He was everywhere in 2022, in posters, in parliaments, in newspapers. He was arguably the most discussed person on earth. But all that has changed. Zelensky is running out of money to fight Russia, and his banker has shut shop. I'm talking about the United States. Joe Biden asked the US Congress for more money, around $61 billion for Ukraine, but Republicans in Congress said no. So Zelensky hopped on a flight. He spent the whole of Tuesday in Washington, D.C. He met Republicans, he met Democrats, he also met President Joe Biden. His mission was to rally American lawmakers. Unfortunately, he failed. The Republicans are not going to budge. Let me tell you how the day unfolded. First, Zelensky headed to the U.S. Capitol, which is their parliament. He met senior Democrats and Republicans. Here's what the Senate Majority Leader said afterwards.
It was a very powerful meeting. President Zelensky made it so clear how he needs help. But if he gets the help, he can win this war. On the other hand, he made it clear, and we all made it clear, that if we lose, Putin wins. And this will be very, very dangerous for the United States. So we cannot let Putin influence through any surrogate what we need to do for Ukraine.
A meeting can be good, it can be bad, it can also be okayish. But how can a meeting be powerful? That's what you say when talks fail. Powerful meeting. And the mood in Washington, D.C. reflected that. Zelensky had visited the U.S. Capitol in December last year. The atmosphere was very different then. Kiev's counteroffensive had been a success. Russia was isolated. Washington was draped in Ukrainian flags. Zelensky even addressed a joint session of the U.S. Congress. But this time, it was low-key. A very business-like mood, and the reasons are obvious. Kiev's second counteroffensive has failed, so US lawmakers are asking, why should we give you more money? What's the strategy here? And yes, there is domestic politics too. Republicans want to give the aid on one condition. They want more funding for the southern border, basically tougher immigration curbs.
I have asked the White House since the day that I was handed the gavel as Speaker for clarity. We need a clear articulation of the strategy to allow Ukraine to win. And thus far, their responses have been insufficient. I have also made very clear from day one that our first condition on any national security supplemental spending package is about our own national security first. The border is an absolute catastrophe, and this is because of the policies of this White House and this administration.
I know what you're thinking. Why doesn't Joe Biden just give him what he wants? Because then some Democrats may not support his bill. So it's a tough call for Biden. The White House says aid will run out by the end of this month. Plus, Congress is breaking for holidays. It will convene again in the new year. So right now, it looks like mission impossible. And Biden realizes this. During his meeting with Zelensky, the president changed his tone. He usually promises endless support, but not this time. See if you can spot the difference between Biden's old speeches and this one.
The American people have been with you every step of the way, and we will stay with you. We will stay with you for as long as it takes. I believe we'll have the funding necessary to support Ukraine as long as it takes. Will not weaken. We will stand for liberty and freedom today, tomorrow, and for as long as it takes. A powerful statement of our commitment to Ukraine as it defends its freedom today and as it rebuilds the future, and we're going to be there as long as that takes. The American people can be and should be incredibly proud of the part they played in supporting Ukraine's success. We'll continue to supply Ukraine with critical weapons and equipment as long as we can, including $200 million I just approved today.
Hope you spotted it. Biden usually promises to support Ukraine as long as it takes. But this time he did not. He said, as long as we can. So has the president changed his speechwriter, or has he changed his policy? Right now, the latter seems more likely, a policy change. He did give Zelensky something, though. $200 million. Normally, it would seem like a lot of money, $200 million, but it's just 0.3% of what Ukraine is asking for. So Zelensky asked for the moon, and Biden gave him a rock. Nonetheless, he's pushing on. Zelensky says financing is not the problem, morale is. And with or without American money, Ukraine will fight.
It's not about financing. It's about the morality. The biggest problem, when you don't support Ukraine, that people on the front line, families which are waiting for their heroes at home, that they think that the United States doesn't support Ukraine and that Ukraine is alone. And of course, people afraid to be again alone. But you have to know that even if we will stand and fight.
But for how much longer? If US funding stops, Ukraine will lose. Even Europe knows that. More than 100 senior EU lawmakers have written a letter to Congress, to the US Congress. They want the US to keep giving aid. It's a pretty rare move. Lawmakers of one country or region making a request to lawmakers of another country. It shows you their urgency. Questions must also be asked of Zelensky. Not everyone is happy with his leadership. The mayor of Kiev says Zelensky is becoming an autocrat. His commander-in-chief says the war is at a stalemate. In fact, there's a growing rivalry between the two, Zelensky and his top general. They're at odds. Some reports say he could soon fire him. He would fire the general. Things are so bad that the defense minister had to clarify.
I always joke with the commander-in-chief about this question. I ask him, who is firing you this time? In this regard, I am always open. If there are such questions, I will let you know. There are no such questions on the agenda. We had questions regarding some commanders though.
So all is not well in Kiev's war room. There is no progress anywhere. Not on the battlefield, not on foreign aid, and not in Brussels. The European Union is holding a summit this week. On the agenda is Ukraine's membership. Zelensky was hoping to join the EU as soon as possible, but one EU member is saying no. That's Hungary. So I guess the question is, why not begin talks with Russia? Moscow realizes that the momentum has swung, so they're driving home the advantage. Today they fired ballistic missiles at Kiev. It's the second such attack in 1 week. Ukraine says at least 53 people were killed, so Zelensky needs to take a call now. Does he gamble on the US Congress coming around? Does he fight alone? Or does he pursue a political settlement? Frankly, an endless war helps no one. People may talk about you for months on end, but eventually the world moves on. If you don't believe me, look at the Time magazine. In 2022, they named Zelensky as Person of the Year. This year, it's Taylor Swift. That's the world we live in. And that's the reality that Ukraine must accept. On most days, politics is boring. No drama, no surprises, no unexpected twists. But Thursday was not most days. We saw peak drama at the European Union summit in Brussels. We're talking soap opera stuff. The EU heads of state were holding talks, and they had a lot of things on the agenda. But two issues stood out. One was membership for Ukraine. Should the EU begin accession talks with Kiev or not? And issue number two, long-term aid, again for Ukraine. Now, the European Union has 27 members. 26 of them agreed on the first issue. They wanted to begin membership talks with Ukraine. 26 agreed, one of them did not. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban, he's been leading the country since 2010. He's also Russia's closest partner in Europe. So Orban said the time is not right. His opposition could have threatened the whole thing because in the EU, every member has a veto. Anyone can shoot down any proposal. All it takes is one veto. So what did they do? They innovated. You see, Orban had a clear dilemma. He did not want to vote yes to accession talks. At the same time, a veto was a bad look. 26 versus 1. It would have made him look bad. He would have been left isolated. So reports say German Chancellor Olaf Scholz proposed a solution. He pulled Orban aside and he told him, why don't you step outside during the vote? Grab a coffee. That way you won't have to support or veto. And that's exactly what the Hungarian leader did. He decided not to use his veto. Instead, he just left the meeting room, a bit like abstaining from voting.
I didn't want Hungary to have to take such a bad decision on its conscience, and I said I didn't want to participate. Hungary doesn't want to be involved in this bad decision, so you do it on your own. And so I left the room.
In his absence, the 26 members voted. They agreed to begin accession talks with Ukraine. It was certainly a surprise because most leaders had expected Orban to veto. They thought this summit would drag on. Even President Zelensky of Ukraine, he called it a remarkable result for his country.
This is a truly remarkable result for Ukraine and for the whole of Europe. Another step towards Ukraine's full membership in the European Union. I'm grateful to everyone who supported us and fulfilled exactly what we had agreed upon. No matter what happens, we are working, fighting and building up our strength. The strength of our beautiful Ukraine.
Let's talk timetables now. How long will accession take? It can vary from country to country, but the average is around 4 years. And in this period, a lot could go wrong. Some 70 unanimous decisions will have to be taken at various stages, 70. And Hungary can block any of them. In fact, Viktor Orban has threatened to do just that. He says he can halt the accession later on. So it's not a done deal yet, which brings us to the issue number 2, that of aid. The European Union was seeking $54 billion for Ukraine. It's a mix of loans and grants. Again, a unanimous decision was needed, but this time, Hungary did veto. Orban said Ukraine cannot be given $54 billion. Why? Because he says Kiev is not a member yet, and it's a fair argument. But the real reason is not that. Orban wants more money from the EU, as simple as that. He wants funds to tighten his borders, to keep migrants out of Hungary. The EU did make some concessions before the summit. They unlocked $11 billion for him. They gave Viktor Orban $11 billion. But now Orban wants more, around $22 billion more. If he gets that money, he could approve the aid. It's a big blow for Ukraine. They're running out of aid from the United States. They needed Europe to step up. Now, all the headlines talk about the accession vote, but frankly, aid was a bigger issue for them. Just think about it. An EU membership may come in 2027 or 2028, years away, maybe even later. But by then, what will be the situation in Kiev? Will the current regime remain? Will Kiev still be standing, or will Russia have won the war? So the immediate requirement was funding, and on that, the EU has failed. What's the next step now? Well, there are two options. One is to go bilateral. Each EU member can donate the money individually. It's likely to be more expensive and complicated. The other way is to wait until January. That's when EU leaders are meeting again, next month. And they will once again discuss the aid for Ukraine. If Orban gets his money by then, he may support the funding. Or maybe step out for coffee. If not, it will be a repeat of yesterday.
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці і українки. Кілька підсумків за цей день.
I wish you health, fellow Ukrainians. A few summaries for this day. First, I would like to thank Japan for a very timely and much-needed decision to support Ukraine. $4.5 billion in the total amount, and we expect the first part, $1.5 billion, already in January. A significant part of this aid package will come in the spring. Japan is consistent and very principled in its support of our country and our people, and I am grateful for this assistance.